Welcome everyone to the Nebraska Wind and Solar Conference Renewable Energy Series featuring the State of the Utilities. A couple housekeeping items that we're going to go over. First, your audio will be muted during this session. If you hover your mouse over the bottom of your screen, you will see a toolbar pop up. This toolbar has the Q&A section where you can submit questions for the moderator and speaker to review at the end of the presentations. There's also a hands up feature down there. If you're having some technical issues, you can click on that. We will do our best to help you out. This session will be recorded and available on the Nebraska Wind and Solar Conference website in the next couple of days. And with that, I'm going to turn over our session to our moderator today, Mr. Bruckner, partner with the Fraser Stryker Law Firm.
Thank you, Anita, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Renewable Energy Series presented by the Nebraska Wind and Solar Conference. Today's webinar is on the state of the utilities, and those utilities are represented here today by really the A-team, frankly, although I don't see any Mr. T in the group. The A-team is here, the CEOs of the Nebraska Public Power District, Tom Kent, is here, as well as the administrator and CEO of the Lincoln Electric System, Mr. Kevin Wales, and also the president and chief executive officer of the Omaha Public Power District, Timothy Burke. The order of presentation today will be Mr. Kent, followed by Mr. Wales, and then concluding with Mr. Burke. We will have an opportunity at the end of our session after each of these gentlemen presents for questions. And we do hope that there are questions. That's what really makes these webinars valuable, is to engage in the Q&A. And I know each of these gentlemen well enough to know that they really appreciate the questions and look forward to answering them. So let me begin, first of all, by introducing Mr. Tom Kent. Tom has been the CEO of NPPD since March of 2020. He's been with NPPD approximately 30 years. He spent his previous 9 years at NPPD as the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the utility. He's held numerous other positions within the utility during his time there, including within the nuclear organization, I believe. Mr. Kent is a proud native of Tilden, Nebraska, I believe. I think there's a Hall of Fame baseball player from Tilden, if I'm remembering right, Tom. And also is a veteran of the United States Navy. I'm very pleased and privileged here to present Mr. Tom Kent. Tom, you're up.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you for the warm welcome. And yes, indeed, Tilden is most famous. It's the home of Richie Ashburn, who played for the Philadelphia Phillies in the 50s and 60s, and also became the color commentator of their program on radio and TV. So yeah, it's pretty cool. I actually got to meet him once. And he is definitely the most famous person from Tilden, Nebraska. Thank you, everyone, for participating today. It's a pleasure to be here and talk to you all virtually. Wanted to just give you a kind of an update of some of the things that are going on at Nebraska Public Power District. I am speaking from my home office today, so as we've all gotten used to over the previous year, I hope there aren't any distractions, but if you hear barking dogs, it's likely coming from my house. So we'll work through that. I wanted to start briefly and talk a little bit about the weather event in February, the week of February 15th, and talk about the utilities response. I know that's been in the news a lot. All three utility CEOs, as well as the Chief Operating Officer for Southwest Power Pool and the General Manager for Butler Power District here in Nebraska, had the opportunity to talk to the committee, Natural Resources Committee of the legislature a week ago, to give an update on kind of the events and what happened. And just from a general standpoint, none of us, and we've all said this several times, and we'll continue to say this, no one in the utility industry wants to see a situation happen where we have to interrupt customer loads in order to protect the transmission system and the generation system from having widespread uncontrolled outages. But yet that is what happened on the 15th and 16th of February. We all have plans as transmission owners and operators and generator owners and operators to ensure that we operate the system in a reliable fashion. And those plans include plans to interrupt load to bring the system back into balance if necessary in a controlled fashion before the system imbalance degrades to the point where you see widespread uncontrolled outages. And these plans have been developed over years and years and decades of experience in the utility industry, going back to previous widespread outages, 1965 outages in the Northeast to the 2003 outages in the Northeast, are particular occurrences and events in the past where the industry learned a lot and put into place a lot of the framework and reliability standards and regulations that govern our work today. And we saw that in action, unfortunately, on the 15th and 16th of February in the midst of a widespread extreme cold weather event that stretched through the entire mid-continent of the United States that impacted the supply of natural gas fuel and the supply of electricity generation from natural gas and other sources, to the point that the generation wasn't able to stay in balance with the peak loads that were being experienced. And we saw the outcomes of that in the Oppd area of Texas. And that made a lot of discussion and certainly was widespread issue. We also saw that within the Southwest Power Pool, where the Southwest Power Pool acts as a balancing authority as part of the Eastern Interconnect of the United States. And one of their jobs is to ensure that generation or supply and load or customers' demand remain balanced on a real-time basis. And they do that working with their memberships, with the transmission owners and the load-serving entities. And when you get in a situation like we saw, where the load continues to increase and all generation that is available is in use, in order to bring the system back into balance, the operators are trained and practice on instituting these controlled rolling blackouts that we unfortunately had to use on Monday and Tuesday of that week to ensure that we avoided large, widespread, uncontrolled outages that would have been more damaging and long-lasting. For NPPD, we had to interrupt roughly 2% of our load on Monday for about 50 minutes. And on Tuesday, that was about 40 megawatts of load, just to give you a feel for that. On Tuesday, the 16th, we ended up having to interrupt almost 4 times that, or 178 megawatts of load, which was about 8.75% of our load. And those interruptions lasted for a combined total of about 3 hours, though we would rotate our loads as much as you will hear from Tim and Kevin to shorten the amount of time that particular customers were out as best we could. Those loads included, a lot of our wholesale customers. We primarily serve other smaller utilities in the state of Nebraska. We also have a retail division. We interrupted about 20,000 customers in our retail division as part of that. A lot we will learn from that as an industry. The reviews have already begun. The 3 utilities in Nebraska are working with the Southwest Power Pool to help them learn and improve from this event. We are also working with our own customers at NPPD to help us improve and learn from this event. And I think you'll see a lot of discussions nationally as well over the next several months or years about things like resource adequacy, fuel security, reliability, fuel mix and resource types, and how those resources may behave differently in the winter months versus the summer months. And again, driving towards better long-term, reliable, affordable solutions for the people we serve in the state, to ensure that we have the right types of resources going forward and the right mix of resources going forward. On that line, this week at our board meeting, We reviewed the work of 2 consultants that our board hired last summer to finish our preliminary analysis on carbon business risk and carbon emissions risk. So that presentation was the focus of our board's discussion on Wednesday. We have information that's publicly available from that presentation. It was really to talk about potential ways to reach certain carbon emission reduction scenarios. And we gave those vendors 3 scenarios to look at. They gave us some good information to think about that will help us roll into our next integrated resource planning process, which we plan to start this fall. It will help our board as they finish discussions with our customers and with other stakeholders to establish their strategic guidance for us on carbon emissions and resource mix moving forward, something we refer to internally as Strategic Directive 05. The schedule for completing that strategic directive guidance from our board, they hope to have that done in the next 6 months or so by the fall, which will fit well with using that guidance as we move into our next integrated resource planning process, which we plan to start in the fall. We'll have about 1.5 years or so worth of work there, working with our customers and working with our staff internally to evaluate those various planning options for what our resource mix should look like to ensure the right intersection of affordability and reliability and resilience and sustainability for our customers that we serve here in Nebraska. So I'm looking forward to that ongoing discussion. On the next item, I just want to highlight that's probably of some interest, as we announced at a press conference in early January, a joint effort between us and Monolith Materials, which is located out near our plant, our Sheldon station at Hallam, Nebraska. They make carbon black. They have a desire to supply their electricity supply from 100% renewable resources. So we are working with them and Norris Power District, who is our wholesale customer and their retail provider, to secure renewable resources for their use. And we are in the process of putting together a request for proposals. We expect that RFP to be on the street end of March, early April, and looking for input and hopefully a lot of responses from developers to help grow the renewable resource mix here in Nebraska and support Monolith Resources. Last thing I just want to mention briefly is from a COVID standpoint, our organization has been, like other organizations, has been dealing with the pandemic for 1 year now. It's hard to believe. But we've had our team mostly working remotely for the past year, except for our power plant folks, et cetera. We are hopeful with vaccinations now. We're starting to see staff get vaccinated and friends and colleagues get vaccinated around the state. And with the numbers coming down, that we will be in a position to start to return our staff to work over the next couple of months. But it's been a long haul for all of us. We've all learned how to do these types of virtual meetings and virtual seminars quite well. But I am looking forward to getting back together face-to-face and getting to talk to you all in the future at a face-to-face wind and solar conference and seeing my teammates and colleagues across the state in a more normal fashion going forward. Steve, with that, I'll turn it over to you, and I'll be happy to answer questions when we get to that part of the discussion.
Well, that's just excellent, Tom. Thank you for that really fine overview of NPPD's business operations. There's a lot going on in our industry, as I think each of the 3 of you know, and probably many of the folks on the who are participating in the webinar. Our next panelist is Mr. Kevin Wales, the Administrator and Chief Executive Officer of the Lincoln Electric System. I believe Mr. Wales took this position in July of 2010, been there for about 11 years, and has quite a number of years in prior service with other municipal utilities, including the municipal utility in Tallahassee, Florida, and also in Lamar, Colorado. Kevin, I believe you're a graduate of Colorado State University. And it's just a real pleasure to welcome you to this panel. And at this point, I'll just turn it over to you for an overview of Lincoln Electric System. Mr. Kevin Wales.
Thanks, Steve. Tom kicked off talking about the weather event. I'm actually going to talk about that last. Although I don't have slides today, one of the background behind me is actually our new operations center and office. And I wanted to give just a little description of that because I think it demonstrates kind of our desire to make sure we're walking the talk with respect to sustainability. We basically acquired about 120 acres for this facility in 2015. And that was really driven by three primary factors. One of those was risk mitigation, because we only had one service center warehouse facility in the community. It was on the northwest side of the city. And that gave us a risk profile, both for flooding as well as, for example, a tornado event, some catastrophic events that would potentially impair our ability to serve our community. The second thing was we obviously had growth that we were looking at, and then there was really the response time, because our community has been growing a lot to the southeast, and so this facility is located actually on the southeast part of the city where there's an awful lot of growth. Some of the neat things about it. First, we completed the first phase, which were the operations center and the warehousing, and occupied that in April of 2019, because that was really a key part of the risk piece. We've moved, basically the intent was to move out of downtown, which is almost complete. We completed basically the phase 2 office portion in December, and we're still in that punch list, moving in type of that. But many of the things we did here, I think, are very neat. First, the facility was built to green building certification standards, and whether it's LEED equivalent or other types of known certification. The heating for this is a separate facility that has ground source heat pumps, over 300 wells to serve it. We've developed about 80 acres of the 120 for the campus. Things even like using stormwater pond gray water for irrigation. Landscaping is actually, there's not a lot of it, but what there is would be irrigated with gray water. And we've got 2 more pieces that are going to be constructed this year and next year, one being basically a transformer and cable warehouse facility, as well as basically carport structures for those vehicles that are parked outside, both of which will have solar on them, and we'll have about 200 kW worth of solar on those 2 buildings as well, which is just some of the things that we've done to kind of make this a unique, not only a unique facility, but one that'll be here for the next 50 years and meet the kinds of criteria we're trying to move towards for sustainability. Tom also mentioned the COVID piece, and the neat thing about this facility was when we talked about doing risk management, like a lot of things we planned for pandemics, I don't think we really knew all of the pieces. We all had pandemic plans, which I think most of us probably threw out in the first 3 weeks and said we need to rebuild that. But one of them was having the second facility gave us a lot more flexibility for our crews, both staggering the start times and all the things that would go with a COVID response, and making sure that, like all of our businesses, that we're minimizing the social contact, but meeting that criteria that we had to have people out there servicing, doing the construction, because that part of our business did not back off at all. So like Tom mentioned, power plant people, all of our people that could not work from home, actually, we're in about 50% of the organization was still at work. We actually had everybody back by August, and again, the other 50%. And so when we got to the Thanksgiving timeframe, we actually suggested those people who would like to work from home and could then do it till we got past the holiday surge. And we're at that point now where we're actually just bringing the bulk of the people back. It should be done by mid-April. So we feel good about that, and we're still maintaining all of those appropriate protections for everyone. One of the big news for us coming out of 2020 was we went through a year-long process, a little different than Tom described, but did a lot of education with our board about setting a decarbonization goal. I'm sure many of you have heard that the board approved a decarbonization goal, basically to be net zero CO2 from our generation resources by 2040. It's really somewhat of a companion to a lot of the things we've been doing over the last 10 years. In the last 10 years, we've reduced our CO2 production basically by 42% from 2010 to 2019. Our energy production from renewables last year was equivalent to 49% of our retail load. 76% of our passenger vehicle fleet are hybrid, plug-in hybrid, or electric vehicles at this point. The SEP program, our sustainable energy program, that's the incentives we have for basically both industrial and residential customers and demand response, has offset energy for 13,000 homes. So all of that plays into that, and how we go forward basically is going to be trying to match the same thing we've done in the past, is watch first to make sure that we're meeting our reliability criteria, certainly making sure that we're checking the financial piece of that, but just kind of matching that all up to make sure that those moves we make are done prudently to maintain both reliability and cost for our customers. And then we're continuing to do a lot of things that I guess revolve around that as well. We actually announced a microgrid that had been kind of on the board for probably, I guess 4 or 5 years ago. We looked at doing a microgrid downtown for critical facilities. And it really got too complicated because when we looked at it, there was so much switching involved. It looked like if we needed something in a catastrophic situation, quite honestly, it was going to take too much time to make that function. We looked at it again, basically in the last couple of years, and determined maybe what we should do is just take a whole large area of downtown, kind of have it bounded into the downtown area that included lots of key facilities, including the Pinnacle Bank Arena, a grocery store, a drugstore, the Justice Center with the county and city offices, the Capitol, the state office buildings, the federal office building. And it's in this bounded area. We have a gas turbine in that area that can actually, we did testing to make sure that we could bring it up under a black star situation and actually serve that load area. In addition to, there's like 300 kW of solar in the footprint there. There's the equivalent of 500 kW of thermal energy storage in that same footprint. So we wrapped all that together to basically make a microgrid that if we did have a catastrophic event, that we'd have a key part of the downtown that would be able to be used for, not only the key services that might be needed, but for example, the Pinnacle Bank Arena, if it was needed to basically house people in a catastrophic event. So we think that's neat. We did it using basically the existing resources in place. And as we go forward, we may decide that there's some other expansion that we can do with that involve energy storage or even other renewables. Getting back to the polar vortex, Tom described it well. We all had roughly the same percentage of our load that we needed to address for those same periods of time Tom referenced. For us, that meant 10 megawatts, or about 4,000 customers were impacted on the 15th. And on the 16th, it was about 43,000 customers and about 40 megawatts of load were interrupted in the different cycles that we applied. One of the things about, I think the majority of the people on this call understand what a megawatt is, but it probably is important to note that, that's, if you're talking about average customers for us, that's maybe a megawatt's maybe about 800 or 900 customers. On one hand, a megawatt's 1,000 megawatts. So that means that something like a Walmart might be 600 to 800 kW. So, that's 0.8 of a megawatt there. So that gives you an idea of the number of customers and how we were looking at that interruption. But some of the neat things out of that for us, those of you who are our customers and may have experienced the interruption, we appreciate your patience with us doing that. But we also found that there was a significant issue when we started activating our plan that Tom referred to, that we all do tabletops and we all review those plans typically once a year to look at the circuits. We discovered there were some things that we hadn't done as well as we should. And that one of those was the communications element about how do we communicate, because we get these notices immediately and we have to respond. There's a regulatory requirement that we do. And how do you let customers know? So overnight between Monday and Tuesday, our staff actually compiled an addition to our outage map to be able to put up the areas that not only were currently interrupted, but what the next area would be, so that we could get that. And that communication helped a lot. But the other thing that was really nice, we have a relationship with a bunch of our customers where we will pay them to run their generation in certain events. This happened to be one. It's a voluntary issue. They can make a decision. But to give you an idea, we had customers generating 27 megawatts during that event to help reduce the load, not only for Nebraska and the SPP footprint overall. And that was helpful, clearly, in making that work. And so there was lots of different pieces that went into the event, as Tom talked about. But one of the keys to this is, I think it was a very good example of how successful public power is, in that, Nebraska was a net producer of energy and helped support the 14-state area that basically is a Southwest power pool when other people really needed resources and needed that assistance. So I think it's a good story about, our reliability and how we do that. And just one more piece that as Tom mentioned, all of the reviews, the reviews done by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, but NERC, which is the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, actually has a jurisdiction over this, and we would have been subject to up to $1 million a day fines had we not responded to this. Now, none of us would have considered that because we know the importance of keeping the grid stable, and that's what we were doing. But there are other pieces of this that come into play. And finally, one of the things that kind of ties into the polar vortex and the interruptions and the outages as well, actually happens to be our electric vehicle pilot. And some of you may be familiar with that. But we had an electric vehicle pilot program that we ran for, actually, this is the third year. It was originally supposed to be 2 years. And it was to basically monitor how people charge their vehicles, when they charge them, and get that data. Well, certainly when we had the response everyone had to COVID and people weren't doing their normal routines, we decided to extend that a year. But we also added an element to that was voluntary for customers to be incented to not charge their vehicles when we request them not to do it. And to give you the order of magnitude for that, it's kind of interesting. Our normal demand response types of activities like controlling thermostats gives us about a kilowatt, maybe 1.5 kilowatts per customer. The electric vehicles give us between 8 and 9 kW per customer. So significantly important in the kind of event we had. So during those cold weather events, we were actually asking our customers not to charge vehicles at peak times. We still don't have the data about what the success was to that. We'll be getting that from the company we're dealing with, but we believe that also had a significant impact. And certainly it talks about the importance about how we make choices about how we build demand response into our portfolios as well. And finally, something that seems to come up quite a bit in the discussions about the polar vortex are, well, when all of us, or the industry, is looking at decarbonization, how are we going to be dealing with that in the future? And we're involved in a variety of different things, as is NPB and Oppd. One of those happens to be basically a low carbon research initiative done by EPRI that we're helping fund with respect to looking at hydrogen as a resource. And that might very well be the transition fuel we see of moving from natural gas to hydrogen, still using those resources that we have, the gas turbine resources. So, but when the board adopted their goal for basically the decarbonization, the one thing that they did is they recognized the challenge. And I'm going to read a part of that because the resolution indicates that the administrative board, that the ultimate path and pace to achieving such goal must be balanced by continued commitment to high electric system reliability, environmental stewardship, a fiscally responsible focus that carefully considers financial impacts to all customers, especially LES customers with low and fixed incomes, and consideration of existing contractual obligations, advancement in generation energy storage, carbon capture technologies, and other emerging solutions. So we don't believe there's a silver bullet out there now. And we recognize we have lots of obligations to balance when we're doing this. And I think the board did a great job of saying, okay, here's things we need to put into the mix to look at that. And I believe that's what all of us are doing to make sure that we can meet our responsibility to our customers going forward. So like Tom, I look forward to getting having the opportunity to talk to you all and getting questions later. Thanks.
Hey, thank you, Kevin. What an excellent overview of everything that's going on at Lincoln Electric System. It's very, very cool to hear about your new building and your new facilities. And also what's remarkable, and this is for the benefit of the participants out there, what's remarkable about what these three utilities and others went through during this polar vortex event, and you're seeing it from the first two speakers here, is the calmness and professionalism with which this was addressed. It was a very serious situation, and I'm very proud to say, having worked with NPPD, Lincoln Electric, and Oppd for many years, that these utilities performed in an exemplary manner, and one that we should be very proud of, and it should also make us proud of the public power model that we enjoy here in the state of Nebraska. So our final panelist here is Tim Burke, and I will tell you that I have the great privilege of working with all three of the utilities. We've worked very closely together, but for Oppd, I have the privilege of serving as the general counsel for Oppd and have for a number of years. Mr. Burke joined Oppd in 1997 and became the chief executive officer in April of 2015 after serving as a vice president in various capacities, covering most of the business units of the company. Actually, Mr. Burke also has some past experience in other aspects of the utility business, specifically in the natural gas business. Mr. Burke has spent most of his career here in the great state of Nebraska, but I would be remiss if I didn't add in that Tim is a proud native of the great town of Fort Dodge, Iowa. And Tim, I turn it over to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I know the folks are going, where is Fort Dodge? And I know people from Fort Dodge, and so don't do any searches on my lineage back in Fort Dodge. No, it's great to be here. Thank you very much. I'm going to talk a little bit about, and there's some commonality in the things we're going to talk about. I'll do kind of what Kevin did and talk a little bit about the polar vortex at the end and a little COVID conversation. But I kind of want to start, with Oppd. Our board has adopted 15 strategic directives. And those directives really guide the management team in how we execute our initiatives within the utility. And we report on those strategic directives annually on whether or not we are in compliance and working towards compliance of those strategic directives. It's really a governance tool for us. And it's an opportunity for us to share not only to the board, but to the public and our customer owners on the progress that we're making in a number of different ways. The items that we have really focused on in 2020 has been really around 5 strategic initiatives that we've identified. And some of this came out of the conversation that we had on our board in 2019. And I'll talk about Power with Purpose, and I'll talk about Net Zero Carbon 2050. But we have 5 strategic initiatives that really are aligned together very closely. And those 5 strategic initiatives talk about customer engagement. How are we thinking about customer engagement in the future? In a digital world, in a technology world, around stakeholders, around service, around all those related elements. And so we do have an initiative going on to really begin to craft the foundation of customer engagement for the future. But the second strategic directive is around decarbonization. So when our board voted in November of 2019, as part of our strategic directive number 7 around environmental stewardship, to really focus and move to a net zero carbon utility, really around multiple different functions, not just in our energy portfolio, but internal use and customer focus, customer and community focus. And so we are working with the city of Omaha on their climate action plan and some of that work that may be going on in the city of Omaha that I think will essentially move to other communities across our service territory as well. So that initiative has been undertaken and is moving through the work. And on each one of these strategic directives, we provide updates to the board, scoping documents on the scopes that we're looking at, but also some of the work that we are doing. This decarbonization strategic initiative, we've really engaged around a consulting firm to help us do some of the modeling around that. And you've heard a little bit from Kevin and a little bit from Tom on the work that they're doing. And we're using a company called E3 that has done pretty significant work around decarbonization strategies and modeling across multiple utilities, across multiple regions. The third initiative is around really modernizing our grid. So how are we modernizing our grid for real time, not just for reliability and not just for response issues, but how do we really connect with that customer in that modernizing of the grid differently than we do today? And what does that look like? And we have several pilots that have been in play, and we've certainly seen them reduce significantly outage duration and response from our utility, and be able to respond quicker, faster on smaller outages. And we're seeing some of the value and benefit of that. But how do we do that across all of our systems? And then the fourth one is really around enterprise-wide technology platform and foundation. How do we begin to think about that? Big data related items as we modernize our grid, as we think about decarbonization. And we believe decarbonization has a very clear connection to stakeholders and customers, commercial, industrial, information from the market. How does that all fit together in a strong technology platform and foundation? And then as we begin to think about the changes we're making, whether it's around the energy portfolio or around our internal operations, around services that we will help support on the customer side, what does that workforce transformation look like? And how can we begin to engage around our customers much differently around a future orientation of what that looks like? And so these strategic initiatives are really focused in on kind of a 10-year horizon. But decarbonization or net zero carbon 2050 is really focused on 2050 kind of work, and how can we kind of accelerate that related activity over a period of time. And I'll talk in a little bit more detail about that in just a little bit. Power with Purpose was an initiative the board also engaged in and approved in November 2019. And the action around that was for us to look at negotiating, acquiring PPAs, development, potentially maybe even construction of 400 to 600 megawatts of solar. And we are hoping relatively shortly, over the next month or two, to have announcements around that, where we're moving into, and we have been in negotiations and a variety of work around that. So hopefully you'll be hearing about that. Our commitment is still to continue down our Power with Purpose initiative. And I'll talk a little bit about the work that we've done around resiliency and reliability as we've engaged the board around that in early 2019. We are planning also 600 megawatts of natural gas. Now, part of that is modernizing some gas units. So we have 3 units at North Omaha that are relatively restricted because they're behind a natural gas distribution system, and we don't have capability to use it during the wintertime. And so we're going to modernize those 3 units and essentially decommission those 3 units. But we're adding 2 natural gas sites. One of them is in Sarpy County. It's right next to the Sarpy County landfill, and there's potential capabilities to use natural gas or methane gas from that landfill to power some of that operations. But it's focused on natural gas and dual fuel capability as well. And so that is called our Turtle Creek Generating Station in Sarpy County. It's within the city of Papillion, and the city of Papillion have been great partners for us to really work through and how we really begin to develop that site. I will tell you the next site that we have identified is up at 120th and Military Avenue in Omaha. And it really is on the footprint of the Metropolitan Utilities District, who has a liquid natural gas site or operations on that site. and this is to the north end of that property. So just to continue our great partnership with Metropolitan Utilities District is really important for us. And that site, we're currently working through the stakeholder and design and opportunities there. That site will really have reciprocating engines. So anywhere between 6 and 9, let's say, fast starting, very quick operations to maintain grid stability across our region. So I think that's really important. So we're moving down that path. That has not changed. You will be hearing about some of the announcements relative to the solar contracts and PPAs that we are in negotiations on right now, and others that we will be engaging with. And you will also be hearing about the equipment and some of the information around the reciprocating engines really over the next several months. And again, what we're trying to build in this strategy is all of our generating, peaking assets will be both natural gas and alternative fuels, including potentially hydrogen, as Kevin talked about, and some of the opportunities to be able to do that. So I think that's really important for us to just continue. We're continuing down that path. And as we communicated with our board, there was really some elements that we began to talk with them about early in 2019. It was really around reliability. It was really around resource planning. It was really around resiliency. And we looked at resiliency in a number of different ways, whether it's these low probability, high risk related situations. And we've had a couple of those over the past several years. 2017, we had a F1, F2 tornado in South Sarpy that took out 6 transmission lines, structures that really created some resiliency related concerns or issues. Customers really never saw it unless they were impacted by the outage themselves. But it was because of the resiliency that we had in the system and the reliability built within the generating capacity. We saw the flood in 2019, where we were projected to breach the levee down in Nebraska City 2. We had an outage going on in one of the plants, and we essentially shut down the other plant. But most of our peaking generation was operating, and we were able to maintain resiliency in the region. And so as Tom and Kevin talked a little bit about the polar vortex, it was really the reason and the value of an SPP during those kinds of low probability, high risk situations that really allowed us to continue reliable power throughout the service territory. I think that's really important just to reemphasize as we talk about these assets that we're building, that we're developing across our service territory. And then as we connect them across our transmission grid, the importance of that related activity. I'll talk about one other item that hasn't received a lot of public conversation. Our board will hear an update a little bit this month in our upcoming board meeting, but it's really around what we're calling powering the future. And when the board really gave us the directive around net zero carbon 2050, our planning horizon was kind of in that 10-year timeframe. But we really thought this was really an opportunity for us to kind of step out and begin to think about what the future looks like in 2050. And so we have looked at a variety of trends, current situations, evaluating over 50 trends that are occurring in this industry, and how it could impact the future of what we do and how we do it and how we're engaging customers. We're also, as I said, we're laying the foundation with our board next week. We've had some conversations with them over the course of 2020. We're engaging with our employees. We'll be engaging with our customers around some of this visioning work and futuristic work, really laying out what we believe are kind of first principles, laying out scenarios, and potentially in the July timeframe, really having an opportunity to share what this powering the future 2050 looks like. From an Oppd perspective, and have an opportunity for our customer owners to give us feedback and perspectives and insight on that. And I would say just, I'll talk just about 2 other items and then I'll close and allow the opportunity. You know, as Kevin and Tom talked about, the polar vortex really created some interesting challenges. But I think as I said to the Natural Resource Committee, you know, we executed our plans that we had in place flawlessly. A matter of fact, for us, our plan originally said that we would have outages as long as 2 hours, but we were able to maintain them at an hour except for some operational issues. And in our service territory, we kind of moved from the southeast part of our metropolitan and rural area across our metropolitan area, just because of the communication interconnections of our substations, but also because as we bring those circuits back into our system and energize those, we want to make sure we have operational personnel that can follow the operations of these load shedding circuits around to make sure that if one or two do not come back in because of a breaker or a relay or some other technical reasons, that we have the right human assets there, technical assets there, to make sure that we can energize those circuits. And on the first day, on February 15th, we did have one of those circuits that didn't come in. So some of the folks in Bellevue, some of my old neighbors, were out a little bit longer because that circuit did not come back in. But there are also some resource and technical reasons why we start in that part of our service territory and begin to work our way around the metro and the most immediate rural area. Again, I think our teams responded incredibly well on the energy marketing side, on the fuel side, whether it was our gas generators, fuel oil generators, other operating of our power plants to maintain resiliency across the region. We had a total of about 81,000 customers that were impacted over the 2 days, about 11,000 the first day, about 70,000 the second day. The first day we had to reduce power by about 28 megawatts. And the second day we had 2 tranches. The first tranche was 63 megawatts. And the second tranche was another 63 megawatts. And all the utilities had 2 tranches that we had to work through over about 3.5 hours. We also engaged with our customers, very similar to what Kevin was talking about. And you don't necessarily see this really across this industry. I think the manner in which we have it in the state. One, I don't think you have a meeting like this where you have 3 CEOs talking to an audience about the status of the utilities across our region. But Tom and I and Kevin had conversations leading up to February 15th and 16th, including February 15th and 16th, about their operations, about their focus on fuel oil, work that they were doing, natural gas related issues. And we were in conversation either electronically or via voice. But our commercial industrial customers also supported us, where we had about 126 megawatts on Tuesday, about 60 some megawatts on Monday, about 126 megawatts on Tuesday, really being generated by our customer owners in a number of different ways. And I think that's really important. I would say in our 75-year history at OPPD, we've never had to execute this plan. We drill on it, we tabletop it, we work through all those related issues. And there are going to be some very quick changes. Matter of fact, we have teams that are meeting today. We're going to brief our board next week on our after action review and the scope of what that will look like, and get questions from our board. We begin to obtain questions and survey data from our customer owners as well around that. But we haven't done that in 75 years. And so anytime you exercise a plan, truly exercise it in real time, you will find opportunities for improvement, and we will do that as well. And it's really around customer communication, circuit segmentation. It'll be around a number of different areas, but it's just what we do after storms or major events. We do those after action reviews. And so we're looking forward to that work, and probably over the course of the next several months, begin to share that with our board, share it publicly, really to be transparent around what we found and what we're doing. From a COVID-19 perspective, we've had about, since March of last year, about half of our employees working from home. We had our return to work date in January of this year. We moved it out to March, and now we've moved it out we moved out to June of 2021. And just recently, just as we were seeing vaccine increases occurring, we moved it out to January 22, just to make sure that we could maintain really the herd vaccine perspective, and to keep our customers and our operation folks safe. And I think we've been able to do that to date and really maintain safe operations. We really haven't missed a beat. and our teams are doing just amazingly well regarding that. It's interesting, when we've done a survey of our employees that are working from home, there was a of the 900 employees working from home, there's about 3% that said, I want to come back to work full time. The rest are scattered between, don't want to really come back into an office environment. I'm healthier now than I've ever been. Maybe you want a hybrid, 2 days a week, 3 days a week, collaborative days. So we have a return to work team that's really working on what that looks like in the future. And we have some time to begin to put together what that strategy may be. So we're looking forward to that. And our teams, again, in the field, in the power plants, in our operation areas have been working incredibly well together. The last item that I'm going to talk about is an announcement yesterday at Oppd. I know I have a couple board members that are on this call. I plan on retiring July 2nd of this year. And the whole story you can read, but I just want to talk about a couple things. I've been in this utility industry for over 40 years, working on the natural gas and electric side, natural gas side, and then at Oppd for 24 of those 40 years. This is an incredibly honorable industry. It is full of dedicated men and women that serve Nebraska specifically every day in Nebraska. And the two leaders on this panel and many other public power districts or municipalities in the state, our teams have been on mutual events together. We've helped each other. I remember when NPPD had the terrible storm that took a lot of transmission lines down. At the same time, we were building transmission for Nebraska City too, and we moved that wire over to them. We know that they have come and helped us in mutual aid storm events. So is LES, so is Fremont, so is Loop, so has many others across this region. And we've partnered with each other and we've assisted each other. And that may be different than a lot of states and how we work together on good days and on bad days. So I'll end it in this. This is a really special place. And public power is really a special model full of just absolutely amazing people that are really focused on our passion to serve, on how we honor our communities and serve our communities, and how we care for each other. And I just want to thank my board members that are here today, but also the industry. Thanks for allowing me the opportunity to serve. It's been a distinct honor and a privilege for me to do that, and I will always be a public power supporter. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Steve, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Tim. And I will say that those of us who work with you every day, we're not quite there with your announcement. We will miss you very much, but thank you for everything that you've done, and wish you all the very best going forward. We're going to turn to the Q&A, but before I do that, I think from all three of these leaders, you all have seen the dedication that they bring to this job each and every day. And I really wish that many of you who are interested in this field, and you wouldn't be on this call if you weren't, would have been able to observe the performance during this extraordinary polar vortex event, and just the professionalism that everyone approached this with. When you hear these three CEOs say that literally the last thing that any of them would ever want to do is be forced to curtail power to customers. I mean, you almost, I will speak as an observer, you almost see that manifested in a physical way. I mean, it's in their DNA, I think, to keep the power going, and it's really a remarkable thing to see. All right, well, we do have a number of questions, and I encourage those on the call to put your questions into the Q&A. I will start out here. There's a question for Mr. Kent. And the question is, what does the future look like as we reduce coal and natural gas use for baseload? Does nuclear or battery storage play a greater role? Mr. Kent.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and certainly the the month of February and the cold weather vortex really reinforced and brought to the forefront how important and critical reliability and resiliency is for our customers, coupled with affordability and sustainability. So that's a dialogue that we have to have. I think base load is a traditional term that's used for those kind of power plants that kind of run and operate and fill in the base all the time. With the changing resource mix and the changing marketplace, that term maybe is becoming a little antiquated. I mean, maybe it's a little bit more about having resources that are flexible, that it can meet the changing loads, that can meet also changes in what's happening with renewable resources, intermittent resources, we like to call them, wind and solar and those kinds of things. So for the time being, there's still a place for those types of resources that might be gas-fired turbines or gas-fired reciprocating engines. We're certainly looking at ways to use new technology to help get more value out of coal units, things like carbon sequestration and storage. So it's again finding that right mix of resources that can address the flexibility and variability that's needed more so today than at any time in the past to ensure a reliable and resilient system. Specific to nuclear and battery storage, yeah, I think they play a role. Nuclear is a very clean generating resource. It doesn't emit carbon dioxide. It can continue to fulfill that base resource load as it does today. And batteries have a role to play. They're a way to work through short-term dips and short-term decreases in generation and to get through those bumps. The challenge right now with battery storage technology is its cost and its ability to store truly large scale, utility scale amounts of energy to work over a long period of time. But for the 2 hour to 4 hour to maybe 8 hour time frame, batteries have a role to play. And nuclear does and will, I think, continue to have a role to play in the future as that kind of traditional baseload resource.
Hey, thank you, Tom. Appreciate the answer. The next question is for Kevin Wales. And the question is, how does LES support the installation of more public electric vehicle charging stations? You touched on that, but you may want to elaborate on it just a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think in 2015 or 16, we put the first one in one of the new parking garages at the time in the Haymarket. And the city has done significant expansion after that. We provided incentives to do a 50% of the 50% match for the Nebraska Environmental Trust in a program that they put out. And at this point, I think we have 40 charging points active. There's another 14, I think, level 2 that are going to be completed as related to the Nebraska Environmental Trust. We have the Tesla charging station that's an 8-port. There's 3 DC charging stations. But one of the things when I referenced that the EV pilot that we were doing with respect to charging was to say, in a Midwest city, how do people charge their vehicles? Because we monitor the charging stations that we have access to, and candidly, they don't get used that much in the public charging arena at this time. And so part of that is a cost benefit of, do we need more charging stations? And of course, we're trying to encourage people to do it. So we continue to monitor that. And the information we're getting from the CV pilot should help us gauge. I think the last I checked, we probably had the most charging stations per capita in the state by quite a ways. So we continue to look at that as it goes forward.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kevin. Tim, turning to you again, we're continuing the renewable theme. You may have touched on this, but the question is, does OPPD have any current pilots with regard to battery storage?
We do, and thank you for that, Steve. And we're going to be talking to our board about what we call our Bright Battery Project. It's kind of a 1 megawatt battery that we're going to put on our system to do the monitoring, testing, and understanding of that. To Tom's point, it was really interesting. I had the opportunity to sit in. I had to sit in on a conversation with Jim Robb, who's the president and CEO of the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, part of my role as a APPA board member, American Public Power Association board member. And Jim talked about the batteries. And so the question to him was, how did the batteries in some of the parts of Texas and other parts of the region, how did they show up during this polar vortex? And he said it was really interesting. You know, they were, again, these are short term, as Tom talked about. And he said, actually, the batteries were really a sink and not a source of energy. And so he said, as they think about accreditation of those, and how are they going to think about batteries and other alternative generation in the future? He said they're incredibly good for duct curves and maybe wind fluctuations and frequency issues on the system, but how can we incorporate those batteries and can they be long duration storage long enough for events like this? And so I think that's the technology challenges that we're going to see in some of these changes that we're just going to have to pay attention to. People are going to have to work on, we're going to have to test them, we're going to have to see them, we're going to have to monitor them to see how they do. Certainly an element that we're seeing from a frequency and from a reliability perspective. And we actually have it in our planning mechanism. So how can we use batteries or other kinds of on-site generation rather than building additional transmission or rather than putting in another transformer? If I just have to worry about a 1 hour peak on that substation, are there other alternatives for us to do that are short term and look at that? So we've looked at that in kind of our planning horizon as well. So you'll hear more about that. It'll be it's called our Oppd Bright Battery Project, and we'll be doing some piloting around that very shortly.
Great, thanks, Tim. All three of you have commented on the focus that the utilities have on maintaining reliability and resiliency as we move to a generation mix that includes more renewables. We've also been through this polar vortex event. So the next question is, any thoughts any of you may have relative to the need for upgrading the state's transmission system, either in light of that particular event or in contemplation of moving towards a generation mix that includes more renewable energy? And just randomly, I suppose we'll go back to the top of the batting order and start with Mr. Kent.
Well, thank you. That's a good question. The event that happened in February was really a generation and load imbalance event. So it wasn't as much about the transmission system or issues on the transmission system as it was about just the general imbalance between generation and load. That being said, we also saw a lot of congestion in the transmission system because of the high loads and trying to move energy from the generation plants in the northern part of the footprint, the Nebraska north into the Dakotas, into the southern part of the footprint. And certainly some of the challenges that the operators of the Southwest Power Pool saw, and we noticed on our systems in Nebraska, and I think the states to the north of us noticed, as they were trying to bring the system back into balance by managing load against generation at the same time that they were trying to manage congestion within the transmission system. And we saw some instances where there was some counterproductive actions being taken. So further investment in transmission will help reduce those congestion events. Further investment in transmission will also likely be needed as we look at more distributed resources, more wind and solar renewable resources. I've a former retired member of our industry that was very active in transmission development, both in the region and nationally. One of his famous sayings was, if you like wind, or if you like renewables, you got to love transmission, right? In order to get resources interconnected into the grid and to be able to use them effectively, you have to have the means to move the energy around. So transmission and thinking about transmission development always has to be part of the discussion when new resources are being added. And certainly in Nebraska, we have some major projects going on right now that will help improve the transmission system, strengthen the grid, improve reliability. And those projects need to be finished out and constructed.
Thanks, Tom. Tim or Kevin, feel free to jump in and add anything you wish.
Maybe Steve, just another thought. One of the, I guess, like Tim, I've been well over 40 years in the industry, and certainly for probably the first 30, transmission was always viewed as a reliability tool, to keep us all reliable. And in the last 15 years, there's been more of a movement for basically both markets as well as, of course, support the intermittent sources and renewable sources that are much more productive in some areas of the country than others. And so I think it does mean, as Tom said, we've got to continue to reassess that, and transmission will make a huge difference going forward. But we still have that whole issue of people don't love transmission lines. And so, everybody loves the thought of the renewable resources, but the transmission lines, not so much. And it is a significant difference, both the markets, I believe, and the influx of renewables in different parts of the country that are putting a lot different stresses on the system than we've ever seen before. It's not an antiquated system, as I believe is, unfortunately, we hear too much that it's an obsolete, antiquated transmission system. It just wasn't designed for what we're asking it to do, and trying to construct the facilities to make it do that take a lot of time and effort. So just a thought.
Great, Kevin, thanks. Tim, anything to add, or? I think you may be muted.
Thanks, Steve. One of the things I heard from Jim Robb with NERC and the present CEO is that I think as DOE and FERC and NERC begin to investigate and do their deep dive around the polar vortex, I think you're going to see, are there additional transmission opportunities between regional transmission organizations that need to be upgraded, need to be refined. And to Tom's point, what we said in the hearing a week ago, as we were asking customers to curtail, we were actually being asked some of our generators, our base load generators, to actually reduce load. So it was counterintuitive. They're trying to solve multiple problems. And would transmission improve that? We just went through a 180-mile transmission project called the Missouri Transmission Project that went from Kansas City into our Nebraska City station. And so we may see some things come out of that as we begin to assess extreme weather, extreme events. The paradigms have changed a little bit. And I think very clearly, at least from a planning perspective, we can't rely on the last 30 years of weather to predict the next 10 years of weather. So how are we going to look at those models to do that, to look at those extreme events to maintain reliability? So I think we're going to see those things surface and pop up, and we as supporters and members of SPP will support those initiatives.
Excellent, and thank you, Tim. Switching gears just a little bit, there's a comment from one of our participants noting in complimenting utilities that this polar vortex event was a real challenge and handled well by the Nebraska utilities, and noting that here in Nebraska we do have a robust generation mix, and that includes coal fuel generation, as I think most everyone knows, and providing probably half of our energy in that range. So the question is, are new higher efficiency coal units even considered out there in the utility business for future resources in order to maintain a balanced fuel mix? Any one of you would, let's go backwards and start with Mr. Burke.
Yeah, I think this piece that I'm hearing very clearly, it can't be just reliable generating units. And I think if we begin to, as we will see the DOE and NERC and FERC dive into this, and our own SPP and each of us as members dive into this, I think we're going to find, the electric system and the gas system do not align very well, either in times of markets or times in operations. And what we have been hearing is that at the same time people were shedding load in Texas and in Oklahoma, they were shutting off wells who could potentially be moving gas into the gas system. So we got to align that a little differently. But the diversity of the mix, I think, is going to be really important, but the adequacy of the generation. So our units in Nebraska, except for a couple of units at Oppd, are all dual fuel. And so it wasn't just relying on natural gas. We had fuel oil capability to operate our peaking units. And I think that adequacy component is going to be really important, not just reliability, but the adequacy of getting generation to be able to serve load during peak times, during normal times, during low probability, high risk times as well. So that's my comment.
Great, Kevin, or thank you, Tim. Kevin, any thoughts?
Well, and Tim's right regarding, the gas electric mix, and there's even issues with respect to scheduling for electric and gas that everybody's known about for years, probably got aggravated in this particular event. But to the point about it, high efficiency coal units, I'm not aware of anybody talking about that right now. Absent someone coming up with a good carbon sequestration and storage option, I don't know how much people were going to be looking at, supercritical coal units anymore, at least in the near future, with respect to the concern about the potential for, carbon taxes and different options that might penalize them. So, interesting question, but I've not heard any discussion about high efficiency coal being considered for new resource right now.
Great. Tom, anything to add?
Yeah, I agree with both Tim and Kevin in regards to the alignment between the gas and electric coordination. And I also agree with Kevin's assessment of really looking at new high efficiency coal. I don't think we're going to see that unless there's economic coupling with carbon sequestration and storage. And we're spending a lot of time and effort looking at carbon sequestration and storage for our coal units, because if that's something that's economic that we can do, that provides some value for those units. I would also add, if you look at this event that we've been talking about, the idea of fuel security and having fuel available, whether that's natural gas or coal or uranium in a power plant, or wind or solar, is an important idea. And we learned and will continue to learn a lot about that event. Depending on where you were in the footprint, if you were in Texas or Oklahoma or Kansas, certainly there were challenges with units that weren't adequately winterized. We're seeing that, we're hearing about that, we're reading that. It impacted nuclear units, it impacted coal units, it impacted gas units, it impacted wind and solar units. So diverse resource mix, I think, is really important. A mix that addresses the challenges that we need to face in our future, including things like sustainability. And there's going to be different factors that come into play and new technologies that come into play. As Kevin pointed out, if sequestration and storage of carbon becomes something that's economic and viable, that will change a little bit potentially those resources and how they're used in the future. But where we are today, I don't see a lot of discussion about new coal.
Steve, one more quick follow-up on that.
Sure.
During most of the cold weather event, if you recognize that LES's resources on a nameplate basis are roughly 30% coal, 35% renewables, and 35% natural gas. If you look at the cold weather event over that time span, generally, coal and natural gas were providing about 75 to 85% of the energy for us. And one of the things that means, whether it's carbon sequestration and storage or whether it's using hydrogen to displace natural gas, all of our goals that we have for decarbonization are really going to be challenged, that we have to figure out the right way, both economically and environmentally and reliably, to displace that component of the resource when in a crisis situation like this, they basically were driving our resources. So.
That's a great point, and I think it underscores what all three of you have highlighted during your earlier remarks, which is each utility is very much committed to a decarbonization pathway, no question about that. But yet, again, back to your DNA, your focus always has to be on maintaining reliability, affordability, and resiliency of the utility system. So those are the challenges that we face. And the next question kind of touches on that because it relates to federal policies. And the question is, are there any federal policies that any of the public power utilities would support in order to encourage innovation in clean energy or other types of developments of the utility of the future? So Tim, you want to comment on that first?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And if I remember to see this question, it was kind of potentially around kind of a carbon tax to drive investment and a number of different things. I think, certainly as Kevin alluded, our utilities are involved in this low carbon initiative with EPRI. And I think it's important for us to continue those kinds of developments. And I think we're supportive of the technological changes that are going on. I think there's a piece in how do you fund those, and should it be funded on a carbon tax? And again, my board members know this, and we've shared that with them, that I don't think taxation is the right way to fund initiatives and innovation. And I think that's a very inappropriate way to do that. If this country is interested in innovative ways to do it, then we ought to fund it like we do NASA, fund it like we do space exploration. Let's fund it the right way on behalf of the country, and not really drive it, to have customers pay it directly on their bills. And I think it has a really a stymie effect on economic development and all the other work that goes on in this state. So I have not been, and I think our organization has not been supportive of a carbon tax just for those reasons. But the innovation piece and the need to fund innovation and new technologies, certainly supportive of that. And we pay attention to what's going on in the different laboratories, whether it's small modular nuclear reactors, whether it's long duration battery storage. Are there other technologies that are valuable to us? Carbon capture, and some of the research that's going on there. So we're paying attention and involved in some of those activities, and certainly supportive of them.
Excellent. Tom, you want to jump in and add anything?
Sure. This is something that we stay very active in, and our board is active in understanding, and with the new administration and some of the new policies that are being discussed as potential legislation is certainly something that we'll stay close to. I agree. The idea of incenting innovation and helping create new technologies to solve some of these very challenging problems, that's important to all of us. Some level of predictability for the future, I think, is important to all of us. But at the end of the day, and I'll just use the three utilities as an example, but it's the same thing nationally. We all serve different customer bases. We all serve different needs to a certain extent. So any federal policies have to allow the flexibility to allow the best solutions to be applied locally to accomplish the goals. And so that's certainly an important consideration as well. And you get too prescriptive and start choosing winners and losers from a technology standpoint, that can have unintended outcomes. And I think that's just something we need to be cautious of.
And we've seen some of that with federal policy in the past. So I think that's a great caution by a very experienced CEO. Kevin, anything to add on the federal policy side?
I agree with Tim and Tom. We have taken a position with respect to a revenue neutral carbon fee or carbon tax, that if in fact it could meet criteria so that it wouldn't have an adverse impact on either business customers or low income customers, and it truly can be designed to be revenue neutral, that would be something that we potentially would support. The question ultimately is can you design something that would do that? But this is not unlike we look at resources. This is going to be in order to meet an aggressive approach to decarbonization, it's going to take lots of tools to make that work, both the technology side and potential policy side about how we do it. So I would hate to foreclose looking at anything, but I agree with the comments Tim and Tom made with respect to this local element, our different customers, and not wanting to impose burdens on our customers that would be difficult. So
it's great. Turning back to the polar vortex event, here's a comment from one of the participants that from news reports, it appears that the ERCOT market did not adequately reward preparations for events such as a polar vortex event. The question really is around, is Nebraska's public power structure simply better suited to address those types of events, as we saw an impact, but a manageable impact? Any comments on that? Maybe we'll go back reverse order to Tim and work through the panel.
Thanks for that nice question, Steve. Yeah, we do. Again, we're it is really interesting in this polar vortex because our load shedding practice and plan is really based on summer peak load, where typically our summer peak load is 1.5 times what our winter peak load is. And certainly we've seen a little increase in that winter peak load. We probably set a new peak. But I think we are looking at least internally, and I think we're going to see that in our after action review certainly come up as, are we looking at past 30-year weather history and forecasting the next 10-year? And so are there models that we can think about a little differently, looking at risks, looking at different variables, different paradigms around weather impacts and other climate impacts? And so I think we're going to see that as one of our outcomes, is just to be more intentional about that conversation. I think you're going to see that in SBP. I think you're going to see that across the whole regional, all RTO footprints based on the work that DOE, ERCOT, NERC, FERC will be doing over the next several months.
Great, that's excellent. Kevin, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, Tim's right, but I do think, and I'm going to step out here, there's an awful lot of information that we don't have. But I do think that if you look at Texas, they too had a lot of generation resources, much more than their load, but they couldn't run it. And, it was, I know Tim and Tom have both referenced, and we have it as well. We have dual fuel capability, for example. A lot of the facilities did not in Texas, as I understand, have dual fuel capability. And you have to pay more to put that in. That's a reliability component. You make a decision. And it's more expensive to maintain and to make sure that you can do fuel switching when you need it. One of the things I think that's different about public power, candidly, is, if I'm a marketer in Texas and I'm running a merchant power plant, I'm doing that as cheap as I can. And I'm trying to make money on that market. We have a different goal as public power. Our customers are, in fact, our stakeholders, they're our investors. And so we are basically serving them. We're not concerned about some third party investor and how he makes his money off of us doing something cheap. We're trying to make sure we hit reliability. I know it sounds a little bit like a public power speech, but I do think it makes a difference. That is something we all strive for. And some different regulatory models in different states might not provide that kind of value. And these investigations, I think, are struggling to walk through how do you make sure that you not only have capacity available, but in fact, that it will run when you need it. So
that is really, really well said. And I think it is one of the unique aspects of the public power model. Tom, turn to you. Anything else to add?
Well, I totally agree. And I think that the way the public power model works, as Kevin so eloquently pointed out, is a definite benefit. We're focused on our customers, our stakeholders, our owners, and our decisions are made around finding that best intersection of reliability, cost, resiliency, affordability, and sustainability. I think one of the things that will be yet to be learned and needs to be discussed is the market constructs that are different. There's differences in how the market construct works in the Southwest Power Pool versus ERCOT. Certainly, my personal opinion is the events in terms of some of the financial outcomes that we're seeing in ERCOT and reading about in the newspaper is a cautionary tale about deregulated markets for something as important to our society and to our quality of life and a strong economy as electricity. Fundamental needs like electricity and water, in my personal belief, benefit from having a regulatory framework and a regulatory structure around them. And again, in my personal belief, I think some of what we've seen in Texas and what we'll learn from Texas from a deregulated market standpoint ought to be a cautionary tale and ought to lead towards market improvements over time.
Amen to that. We will see how it all shakes out. And I don't think any of us can in any way sit back, rest on laurels or anything of the kind. I think the fact that all of the utilities, major utilities in the state and others, are engaged in a very thorough after action review of this event really does speak volumes as to the way that the industry here in Nebraska approaches service to its public power customers. There is one more question, and looking at the time, this might possibly be our last question. It's really sort of a step into the future and may require that kind of thinking, because the comment is some advocate for an all renewable grid, kind of contrary to what we've been talking about, to have a diverse mix of resources in order to maintain reliability and resiliency. SPP, it's noted, is studying what an all renewable grid would look like. So the question is, what would an event like this polar vortex event possibly have looked like if the grid was all renewable, if we had all renewable generation resources? Anyone want to tackle that tough question?
I think since Tim is retiring, I think he ought to answer it.
I second that motion.
Well,
Tim gets to answer that.
I'll do that. Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Yeah. This is the friendship and partnership we have. But I'll just give you the facts. I mean, we saw it very clearly on our system. We did not forecast wind on our system through the weekend before February 15th and 16th because the wind forecast was not there. We had very little wind, if any. I would say marginal at that point in time. We really saw wind begin to pick up on the afternoon of the 15th, die back down, not there for the morning of the 16th, but then came up very strong on Tuesday afternoon, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. That's the volatility you have. And we saw very little impacts of solar because of the overcast, because of the polar vortex, because of a number of different elements around that. I think it's difficult to say we could get there today, and the impacts would be pretty significant, because if you didn't have baseload generation that was already operating, it takes 12 to 18 to 24 hours to get at least a coal plant, a little shorter on a gas plant or a fuel oil plant. But if you didn't have them operating, it takes a while to get them warm and to keep them warm. I think it would have been very significant event for the Midwest, for our area, if we were 100% renewable. The outage wouldn't be an hour for a circuit. It would be multiple hours, multiple days. And so I think that doesn't mean it can't work. We just have to think about the balance and the alternatives going forward in the future, and recognizing it's on a continuum based on technological changes that I think we're going to see, whether that's in home operations, building services and systems, or whether it becomes the generation that the utility is required to provide to the region. And I think we have to understand that and be flexible on that, and understand this is a physics issue that we're trying to work through every second and millisecond of the hour, of the minute, of the day, to make sure that we maintain reliability in the region. So anyway, now I'll turn it back over to Kevin and Tom.
Good answer, Kevin.
Well, just to add on to what Tim's saying, one of the things that's interesting is Lincoln, LES has a 100 megawatt interest in a wind farm in Oklahoma, 100 megawatt wind farm in Kansas, and roughly 100 megawatts total resources in Nebraska. During these cold weather times, and I guess I should say when we did that, obviously we spread them out, because when we did the RFPs, there was a significant price difference in picking up wind in Oklahoma and Kansas those times that were to advantage our customers, hundreds of millions of dollars. But it was also different places in the SPP market, so you had different pricing nodes. And the other thing is looking at geographic diversity of wind. And one of the things we saw was, in fact, there would be some days where one of those wind farms would be at almost full production, and the other two wouldn't be at anything. And that swapped over those kind of that week of cold weather. You never knew exactly what was going to be there. But even more importantly is, and the reference term was used earlier about accreditation or accredited capacity. So of the 100 megawatts we have accredited in basically two blocks, there you roughly get about maybe 15 megawatts worth of accredited capacity. And even then, as we proved in this event, that accredited capacity wasn't necessarily there when we needed it during the cold weather. So the question ultimately was, if you're looking at wind, how much wind would you have to build to have enough capacity to serve our load? And can you physically even make that happen? And we also know that our solar had snow on it. So that didn't help us a lot. And so I don't think we'd ever foreclose the fact that you could move toward that, but I think we're always going to have some other resources that support those renewables, and recognize that's kind of the challenge we have and why we're all involved in, like the hydrogen research and those types of things.
It's great. We're right at the hour, Tom, but I will give you the last word.
Well, I'm glad Tim mentioned that it's a physics problem, because that's one of my sayings I use a lot, and that is physics will always win. And that's what drives our industry fundamentally from a reliability standpoint. And in order, with today's technology, as Kevin pointed out and Tim pointed out, if we were to have a system that was entirely renewable, we would have, from a nameplate standpoint, 5 times or more generation, because of its accredited capacity capability of roughly 15 to 20% than what we have today. And so there's a huge cost impact there. And then there's the transmission system issue and the huge cost impact with integrating all the transmission system requirements to do that. And then still at the end of the day, as Kevin pointed out, you can have a black swan event. And as Tim pointed out, you can have a black swan event where the wind's not blowing and there's snow on the solar panels. So a diverse resource mix is critical to ensure reliability and affordability. Someday, maybe there'll be a step change in battery technology, a step change in something new we hadn't thought of that changes that reality. But for our future, the best way to ensure affordability and reliability is have a mix of resources, including wind and solar. And then how to do that in a way that reduces carbon emissions, improves sustainability. That's the challenge of the day for all of us.
Extremely well said, Tom. Thank you. I would like to thank all 3 of the panelists. It's simply remarkable to have all 3 CEOs of the large public power companies that serve Nebraska here for an event like this. So thank you very much, Tom, Kent, Kevin Wales, Tim Burke, for taking time out of your day to provide this very informative webinar for the participants today. I want to thank all of our participants for engaging today, for your excellent questions. With that, Anita, I will turn it back over to you. Thank you all very, very much. Anita?
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, like Mr. Bruckner said, for attending today. A recorded copy of this presentation will be up on the Nebraska Wind and Solar website in the next couple of days. Other than that, thank you all and have a great rest of your Friday. Thank you.